Hi, math, single subject, and multiple subject residents. I wanted to go over the lesson plan template with you so that you know what to do in the future. And if you have any questions, feel free to email Jessica or I. So, starting at the top, the lesson title is really just what the whole lesson's going to be about. And so, it's just the topic of the lesson, and that's the same thing with the central focus. The reason the central focus is there is because for your TPA, you are going to have to do 3 different lessons. And so, there's a central focus to those 3 lessons. Right here, you would just paste the content standards, and on this template, I'll put the link to that website that allows you to find student-friendly and easy to use standards, so that you could just copy and paste into this section. The learning objective section again is just the learning intention. It's the same thing, and so just what the students should be able to do as a result of the lesson, and what the students are going to do as a result of the lesson. The ELD standards, you would find a standard with using this link and incorporate it within your lesson, and you would just paste the standard right here. For culturally relevant teaching, this area we added because we wanted to get you guys to start thinking about how you're making your lessons culturally relevant, because this is going to be a big piece of your commentary for task 1 of the TPA. So in this area, you're just going to talk about how this lesson is going to be culturally relevant to your students and kind of the interests you're bringing into the lesson. And then you're going to use this to actually help with your commentary when you get to TPA time. In the instructional resources and materials area, you really just list the materials you would need to teach this lesson, but you can also link things in this area. You wouldn't be linking it for TPA because they don't click on links. However, getting used to linking things in here will make it easier to find things when it comes down to writing the TPA. In the instructional strategies and learning task section, you're going to just describe things with the gradual release. So I do, we do, you do format. And so this area needs to be super long in that, not super long, but the longest part of the lesson plan, because this is what you're actually doing. So you're going to put as much detail that a sub could be able to follow this lesson. So what students are doing and what the teacher is doing. This area is where you're differentiating. So how are you going to differentiate your lesson? And so the different tiers, so the first tier is what supports are you using for the entire class? So things like sentence starters and other things that will make the class successful, but that are considered supports. And then for targeted supports, this is what you're doing for groups of students. So for example, your English learners, or if you have a SPED cluster in your class, what supports are you providing for them to be successful for the lesson? And then for tier 3, the intensive supports, this is for specific students, especially with IEPs, that you're not providing to the whole class or groups of students, but that you're providing to individual students or even maybe a few students. In this section, the lesson assessment section, you're going to talk about how are you checking for understanding throughout the lesson. This can also include your pre-assessment to see where students are when planning out the lesson. And so a formal assessment would just be like any old assessment where you put it at the end like a test. But in formal assessments, you should be doing this throughout your lesson, like exit tickets, using whiteboards, asking questions, spot checking problems, all of those kind of things. Another thing you could put in this section is an image of what an exemplar looks like. In the evaluation criteria section, you're going to talk about your success criteria. You're just going to list it here, and this needs to align with your learning objective. And then you're going to have a rubric in here. This is just an example of what you can use for a rubric, but you can also have a 4-point scale rubric in here. Mainly, you just need to have a student-friendly rubric so the students know exactly what they need to do. But then also, if you're acting as if a sub's following this, what they would need to know when looking at the assessments and how the students have met those assessments. For the language demands, this is where residents struggle the most, and we'll go over this in seminar, and you'll also get it in your methods courses. But really what the language demands are, there's three different types. So the function is usually the verb of what your objective is. It's what the students are going to have to do to meet that objective. And then the vocabulary, that's just straightforward. It's just defining the vocabulary, but you can also talk about how these knowing the vocabulary supports the students' learning. Especially with secondary, there's some terms that they have to know in order to successfully do the lesson. And then in for the written, visual, or verbal communication, this is just kind of how the students are using the academic language, and so how you're fostering that as well. So, for example, turn and talks or having them use sentence starters. So those are the things you kind of would list here. These little check boxes right here are just having you go back and double check that this area is good for the TPA. For our observations, don't worry about these sections, but you should try to fill out the language demands so that we could give you feedback on it. If you have any questions, feel free to email us anytime. Thank you. Bye.